The 2,000-pound Brahma bull had sent 4 ranch hands to the hospital, destroyed 3 steel gates, and turned what should have been a profitable cattle operation into a nightmare that was bleeding money faster than a severed artery. But everything changed the day. A broken little girl with pigtails and a teddy bear walked up to his fence and whispered, "I know how it feels to be angry." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The vast Montana grasslands stretched endlessly beneath an endless sky, where the Rocky Mountain foothills created a dramatic backdrop for one of the state's most troubled ranches. Sunset Ridge Ranch had been in the Morrison family for 4 generations. It's 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, supporting some of the finest cattle bloodlines in the American West. The ranch sat nestled in a valley outside the small town of Willow Creek, population 847, where everyone knew everyone, and cattle ranching wasn't just a business, it was a way of life carved into the very soul of the landscape. But today, this particular Tuesday morning in late September, the ranch felt more like a war zone than the peaceful sanctuary it had once been. The crisp autumn air carried the tension that had become all too familiar over the past year and a half, ever since Bronco had transformed from a promising breeding bull into what the local veterinarians now called the most dangerous animal. In Gallatin County, ranch owner Daniel Morrison stood at the weathered wooden fence, his calloused hands gripping the rails so tightly his knuckles had turned white as he stared at the massive Brahma bull that had become his greatest financial nightmare. At 52, Daniel had the weathered look of a man who had spent his entire life working under the Montana sun. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, his flannel shirt bore the stains of honest work, and his steel blue eyes had seen every kind of livestock behavior imaginable. But nothing in his decades of experience had prepared him for Bronco's unpredictable and escalating rage. The bull was a magnificent and terrifying sight. Bronco's distinctive hump rose like a mountain above his massive shoulders, his steel gray coat gleaming in the pale morning sun, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that made his aggression even more unsettling. At 2,000 pounds of solid muscle and bone, he was larger than most bulls in the region, with horns that curved menacingly, and a presence that could be felt from hundreds of yards away. When he moved, the very ground seemed to tremble beneath his hooves. 18 months, Daniel muttered to his ranch foreman, Carlos Mendez, a weathered cowboy who had worked the land for over 20 years and had become more like family than an employee. 18 months since Miguel left, and that bull's been nothing but trouble ever since. Look at him, Carlos. Look at those eyes. There's something broken in there. Carlos adjusted his worn leather cowboy hat and spat into the dust, a habit he'd developed whenever he was thinking hard about a problem. His weathered face, marked by decades of sun and wind, showed the concern of a man who had seen too many. Good animals go bad. Boss, I've been working with cattle since I was 12 years old, and I ain't never seen anything like this. That bull's got a mean streak that runs deeper than the Yellowstone River. Miguel Santos had been Bronco's primary handler, a quiet man in his 40s with an almost supernatural ability to work with difficult animals. He had been more than just a ranch hand. He was what Sarah used to call an animal whisperer, someone who could sense what livestock needed before they knew it themselves. Miguel had arrived at Sunset Ridge 5 years earlier, carrying little more than a worn duffel bag and a reputation for handling the most stubborn and dangerous cattle in 3 states. But Miguel had disappeared one morning without explanation, leaving behind only a brief note written in broken English, saying he needed to return to his family in Mexico due to an emergency. The note had been found on the kitchen table, weighted down by a coffee mug, with no forwarding address or phone number. Since then, every attempt to contact him had failed, and Bronco had refused to allow anyone near him without launching into violent, destructive rages that had cost the ranch thousands in medical bills and property damage. The economic pressure was mounting like storm clouds on the horizon. Bronco represented a significant investment. His bloodline was worth over $100,000, and his potential offspring could have secured the ranch's financial future for years to come. His father had been Thunder Ridge Titan, a legendary bull whose genetics commanded premium prices across the western states. His mother came from the famous Red Rock lineage, known for producing cattle that could thrive in harsh Montana winters while maintaining exceptional meat quality. But instead of being a valuable breeding asset, Bronco had become a dangerous liability that consumed resources while producing nothing but chaos and fear. The bills were piling up faster than Daniel could pay them. Veterinary costs alone had exceeded $15,000 in the past 6 months, and that didn't include the property damage, the increased insurance premiums, or the hazard pay he now had to offer. Ranch hands just to work anywhere near Bronco's enclosure. "Boss," Carlos said, his voice heavy with the weight of difficult decisions, "maybe it's time we seriously consider Dr. Peterson's suggestion about putting him down. This can't go on much longer. Yesterday, Tommy Rodriguez quit after Bronco charged. The fence so hard he bent the steel rails. That's the 4th good hand we've lost this year because of that bull." Daniel's jaw tightened, the muscles working beneath his beard as he fought against the inevitable conclusion that everyone else had already reached. Dr. Peterson, the local large animal veterinarian, had been pushing for euthanasia for months, ever since the incident when Bronco had nearly gored him during what should have been a routine health check. The bull's aggression seemed to be escalating rather than diminishing, and every week brought new incidents that put people at risk. "That bull's bloodline is worth a fortune, Carlos," Daniel replied, though his voice carried less conviction than it had months ago. "Miguel managed him just fine for 3 years. Hell, Miguel could walk right into that paddock and Bronco would follow him around like a puppy dog. There has to be another way. There must be something we're missing, some key to understanding what's eating at him." The memory of Miguel and Bronco together was almost painful to recall. Miguel would enter the enclosure with nothing but a gentle voice and infinite patience, and the massive bull would calm instantly. It had been like watching magic, the way the angry, dangerous animal would transform into something almost gentle, under Miguel's care. Daniel had never understood how it worked, but he had trusted it completely. Carlos kicked at a clod of dirt, sending it skittering across the ground. "Maybe so, boss, but we ain't Miguel, and Miguel ain't coming back. We've tried everything, different handlers, different approaches, even brought in that expensive animal behaviorist from Denver. Nothing works. That bull's got it in for every human being except the one who ain't here anymore." In the distance, the ranch house sat like a beacon of warmth against the vast landscape, though it no longer held the same comfort it once had. It was a traditional log structure with a wraparound porch, built by Daniel's great-grandfather in 1923 and lovingly maintained by 3 generations of Morrison women. The house, where Daniel's wife, Sarah Morrison, had once filled every room with laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals, her famous chicken and dumplings on Sundays, fresh baked bread that could draw the ranch hands from half a mile away, and chocolate chip cookies that had become legendary throughout Gallatin County. But Sarah had lost her battle with pancreatic cancer 8 months ago, leaving Daniel to manage both his grief and the ranch's mounting problems alone. The diagnosis had come sudden and harsh. By the time they caught it, the doctors gave her 6 months. She had fought for 8, spending her final weeks not in despair, but in a fierce determination to prepare the ranch and her husband for life. Without her, the house felt too empty now, its rooms echoing with memories of better times. Sarah's coffee mug still sat in the kitchen cupboard, unwashed and untouched since the morning she had been too weak to drink from it. Her reading glasses remained on the nightstand next to the romance novel she would never finish, The House. Plants she had tended with such care were beginning to wilt despite Mrs. Clearwater's best efforts, as if they too mourned their caretaker's absence. Sarah had been more than Daniel's wife. She had been the ranch's unofficial therapist, the one who could calm spooked horses with a gentle word and somehow knew exactly what every animal needed. She had possessed an intuitive understanding of animal psychology that went beyond anything taught in veterinary schools. Her absence had left a void that went far beyond the personal. The entire ranch seemed to feel her loss, from the skittish horses to the normally docile cattle. Mrs. Betty Clearwater, the ranch's cook and housekeeper, had been trying to fill some of that emotional gap, but at 68, she was more concerned with practical matters than the subtle animal psychology that had been Sarah's gift. Betty was a no-nonsense woman who had raised 6 children of her own and had little patience for what she considered soft-hearted nonsense. She could cook a meal for 12 ranch hands without breaking a sweat and could manage the household budget down to the penny, but she had no magic touch with troubled animals. She watched Daniel's daily struggles with Bronco and saw how the bull's impossible behavior was becoming a symbol of everything that had gone wrong since Sarah's death. In her practical way, she worried less about the bull's psychological state and more about the very real danger he posed to everyone on the ranch. "Mr. Daniel," Mrs. Clearwater said, approaching the fence with a steaming cup of coffee in a chipped ceramic mug that had "World's Best Rancher" printed on the side, a Father's Day gift from Sarah years ago. "You can't keep putting yourself through this. That animal's dangerous, and you've got enough to worry about without risking your life every day staring at a creature that would just as soon kill you as look at you." Daniel accepted the coffee, gratefully, wrapping his weathered hands around the warm mug. The warmth was a small comfort against the morning chill that seemed to seep into his bones more easily these days. "Sarah always said every animal has a story, Betty. Something made Bronco this way, and until we figure out what that is, I'm not giving up on him." She wouldn't have given up. Mrs. Clearwater's expression softened slightly at the mention of Sarah, but her practical nature quickly reasserted itself. "Mrs. Sarah was a saint, Mr. Daniel, but she ain't here anymore to work her miracles, and that bull ain't showing any signs of grieving for her. He's just getting meaner and more dangerous by the day. You got responsibilities to the living, not just to some ornery bull with anger management problems." But even as he spoke those words about not giving up, Daniel could feel his resolve weakening like a dam with too many cracks. The financial strain was becoming unbearable, and the constant stress of managing an unpredictable, dangerous animal was taking its toll on everyone at the ranch. The other cattle were becoming agitated by Bronco's presence, their usual calm disrupted by his frequent rages. The ranch hands were requesting hazard pay for any work that brought them within 100 yards of his enclosure, and 2 insurance. Companies had already dropped their coverage altogether. The bank was asking uncomfortable questions about the ranch's viability, and Daniel found himself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how long he could keep hemorrhaging money before he lost everything his family had built over 4 generations. The mortgage payments were becoming harder to meet, and the seasonal cash flow problems that had always been manageable were now threatening to become permanent. Carlos broke the morning silence by pointing toward the gravel road that led up to the ranch house. "Looks like we got company, boss. County vehicle coming up the drive." Daniel squinted against the morning sun and saw a white Ford Explorer with county plates kicking up a small dust cloud as it made its way along the winding ranch road. The vehicle moved slowly, carefully navigating the potholes that Daniel kept meaning to fill, but never seemed to find time for. As it drew closer, he could make out the official seal on the door. "Department of Social Services." "What do you suppose they want?" Carlos asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected this wasn't a social call. Nothing good, Daniel muttered, his stomach tightening with a familiar anxiety. In his experience, when government vehicles showed up unannounced at your property, it usually meant problems you didn't know you had were about to become problems you couldn't ignore. The explorer pulled to a stop near the ranch house, and Daniel watched as a woman in her 30s stepped out, followed by what appeared to be a small child. Even from a distance, he could see that the child was carrying something clutched tightly against her chest, what looked like a stuffed animal of some kind. "I better go see what this is about," Daniel said, handing his empty coffee mug back. To Mrs. Clearwater, "Carlos, keep an eye on Bronco. I don't like the way he's been pacing this morning." As if summoned by his name, Bronco chose that moment to let out a deep, rumbling bellow that echoed across the ranch like thunder. The sound was filled with a rage and frustration that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere animal instinct. It was the sound of a creature in profound emotional pain, though Daniel had long since stopped trying to understand what had caused it. Little did Daniel know that this very morning would bring an unexpected visitor who would change everything. A small girl carrying an even smaller teddy bear, whose own story of loss and abandonment would somehow unlock the mystery of Bronco's rage and transform not just the bull, but the entire ranch's future. The stage was set for what locals would later call the miracle at Sunset Ridge, though on this particular Tuesday morning in late September, miracle was the last thing anyone expected to find in the shadow of Montana's most dangerous bull. As Daniel walked toward the county vehicle, Bronco's bellowing continued to echo across the grasslands, a sound of fury and pain that had become the ranch's daily soundtrack, but which would soon be replaced by something no one could have possibly imagined. The county social services vehicle sat in the ranch driveway like an omen, its official white paint and government plates a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings of Sunset Ridge Ranch. Daniel Morrison approached with the cautious gait of a man who had learned that unexpected visits from government officials rarely brought good news. His boots crunched on the gravel as he drew closer, and he could see through the windshield that the passenger seat held what appeared to be a small child, a little girl with dark hair pulled back in slightly crooked pigtails. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Linda Martinez, a social worker in her mid-30s whom Daniel recognized from around Willow Creek. Linda was known throughout the county as someone who genuinely cared about the children in her care, but she also had a reputation for being direct and no-nonsense when it came to difficult placements. She wore a professional navy blazer over dark jeans, her clipboard clutched against her chest like armor, and her expression carried the weight of someone delivering news that would change lives forever. "Morning, Daniel," Linda said, her voice carrying both familiarity and formal distance. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced like this, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. I was hoping we could talk." Daniel nodded, though his eyes were drawn to the small figure still sitting in the passenger seat. Through the window, he could see a child who appeared to be no more than 6 or 7 years old, clutching what looked like a well-worn teddy bear against her chest. Even from this distance, there was something about her posture, small, hunched, defensive, that spoke of recent trauma and deep sadness. "Of course," Daniel replied, though his voice carried reluctance. "What can I do for you, Linda?" Before Linda could answer, Mrs. Clearwater emerged from the ranch house, wiping her hands on her apron and wearing the concerned expression of someone who had developed a sixth sense for trouble. Behind her, Carlos appeared from the direction of the barn, his weathered face creased with curiosity and caution. "This is about Emma," Linda said, gesturing toward the car. "Emma Rodriguez. She's 7 years old, and as of 3 days ago, she became an orphan. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He had been expecting discussions about property taxes, zoning violations, or perhaps complaints about Bronco's noise levels. Not this. Not another child who had lost everything, another small soul adrift in a world that had suddenly become too big and too cruel. Linda continued, her professional training helping her deliver the devastating facts with clinical precision, while her personal compassion showed in the softness around her eyes. Emma's parents, Maria and Roberto Rodriguez, were killed in a head-on collision on Highway 89 last Saturday night. A drunk driver crossed the center line near Three Forks. They were coming home from Maria's sister's wedding in Bozeman. Mrs. Clearwater gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, that poor little lamb. I remember reading about that accident in the Willow Creek Gazette. They said there were no survivors, but they didn't mention—" "Emma wasn't with them," Linda explained. "She was staying with her grandmother in Billings for the weekend. Her parents were planning to pick her up on Sunday morning." Linda's voice caught slightly on the word planning, revealing the emotional toll that these cases took on even the most experienced social workers. Daniel felt his chest tighten with familiar grief. The loss of parents was something he understood all too well, having lost his own mother and father in a ranching accident when he was barely 18. But to lose both parents at such a young age, to go from a normal family weekend to complete orphan status in the span of a few hours, the cruelty of it was almost incomprehensible. "What about the grandmother?" Daniel asked, though something in Linda's expression already suggested he wouldn't like the answer. 84 years old and suffering from advanced dementia, Linda replied. "She's in a memory care facility and can barely remember her own name, let alone care for a traumatized 7-year-old. Emma's been staying in emergency foster care for the past 3 days while we tried to locate other family members." Carlos stepped forward, his hat in his hands in the respectful manner of someone raised to show deference when discussing serious matters. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but what does this have to do with Mr. Morrison?" Linda consulted her clipboard, flipping through several pages of official documents. "Maria Rodriguez was born Maria Whitfield. Her mother was Elena Whitfield, and Elena's maiden name was Morrison. Elena was Daniel's late wife, Sarah's first cousin." The revelation hit Daniel like lightning. Sarah's cousin Elena, he remembered. Her now a vivacious woman who had left Montana in the 1960s to marry a man from Billings and had rarely returned to visit. Sarah had always regretted losing touch with that side of the family, but life had a way of creating distance, even among people who cared about each other. "Elena died about 10 years ago," Linda continued. "Maria was her only child, and Emma is Maria's only child. According to our genealogy research and state family services protocols, you are Emma's closest living relative who isn't incapacitated." The weight of those words settled over the ranch like storm clouds. Daniel felt the familiar panic that came with unexpected responsibility, the same feeling he'd experienced when Sarah had first brought home injured animals that needed long-term care. But this wasn't a wounded bird or an abandoned colt. This was a little girl whose entire world had been destroyed. "I don't know anything about raising little girls," Daniel protested, running his hand through his graying hair in a gesture that had become habitual whenever he felt overwhelmed. "This is a working ranch, Linda. It's dangerous. We've got equipment, livestock, and—" he gestured toward the sound of Bronco's distant bellowing. "We've got that bull who's been terrorizing everyone for over a year. This isn't a place for a child." Mrs. Clearwater stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding her usual deference to her employer. "Now, Mr. Daniel, this house has seen children before. Your own daddy and granddaddy were raised right here on this ranch, and they turned out just fine. A child needs family, and family is family no matter how distant the connection." Linda looked relieved to have an ally in Mrs. Clearwater. The alternatives aren't good, Daniel. The state foster care system is overcrowded, and most families aren't equipped to handle a child with Emma's level of trauma. She hasn't spoken a word since the accident. Not one word. The emergency foster family said she just sits with that teddy bear and stares out the window. As if summoned by their conversation, the passenger door of the county vehicle opened and Emma Rodriguez stepped out onto the gravel driveway. She was small for her 7 years, with dark hair that hung limply around a face that seemed too serious for someone so young. She wore a pink sweater that was slightly too large, jeans with grass stains on the knees, and sneakers that had seen better days. But it was her eyes that captured Daniel's attention. Large, dark eyes that held a sadness so profound it seemed impossible that such a small person could contain it. Clutched against her chest was indeed a teddy bear, though it had clearly seen years of loving use. The bear's brown fur was worn thin in places, one ear was slightly chewed, and its red ribbon tie was faded and frayed. But Emma held it with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had already lost too much and couldn't afford to lose anything else. Emma stood perfectly still beside the car, not moving closer to the adults but not retreating either. She simply watched them with those enormous eyes, taking in every word of the conversation that was determining her fate. There was something deeply unsettling about her stillness. Children her age should be fidgeting, asking questions, or showing some sign of nervous energy. Instead, Emma seemed to exist in a bubble of profound quiet that spoke of shock and grief too large for her small frame to process. "Hello, Emma," Daniel said gently, crouching down to bring himself closer to her eye level. "I'm Daniel. I knew your mama's mama a long time ago." Emma didn't respond verbally, but her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that was almost unsettling. She seemed to be evaluating him, measuring him against some internal standard that only she understood. After a long moment, she shifted the teddy bear to one arm and extended her free hand toward Daniel in a gesture that was both childish and oddly formal. Daniel reached out and gently shook her small hand. Her fingers were cold despite the mild September weather, and her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so young. "That's a nice bear you have there," he said softly. "What's his name?" For a moment it seemed as though Emma might not answer. Then, in a voice so quiet it was barely above a whisper, she said, "Coco. Mama gave him to me when I was little." The sound of her voice was like a small miracle. Linda's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly made a note on her clipboard. "That's the first time she's spoken since Saturday," she whispered to Mrs. Clearwater. "Not even the Foster family could get her to say a word." Mrs. Clearwater felt her heart breaking for this small, brave child who was trying so hard to be strong in the face of unimaginable loss. She had raised 6 children of her own and had helped with countless others over the years. But there was something about Emma's quiet dignity that touched her deeply. "Well, Coco is a fine name for a fine bear," Mrs. Clearwater said, her voice warm with genuine affection. "I bet he's been taking real good care of you." Emma nodded solemnly, then looked past the adults toward the ranch buildings. Her gaze moved from the barn to the various outbuildings, taking in the horses in the distant pasture and the cattle dotting the landscape. When her eyes reached the area where Bronco's enclosure was located, she paused, her head tilting slightly, as if she were listening to something the adults couldn't hear. "What's that sound?" she asked, her voice still quiet, but carrying a note of curiosity that was the first sign of childhood interest she had shown. Daniel followed her gaze and realized she was hearing Bronco's occasional bellows, which had become such a constant and part of ranch life that he barely noticed them anymore. "That's Bronco," he said carefully. "He's a bull, a very big cow. But he's not feeling very happy right now, so we have to keep him separate from the other animals." Emma continued to stare in the direction of the sound, her expression thoughtful. "Why isn't he happy?" The question was so direct, so innocently perceptive, that Daniel found himself momentarily at a loss for words. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes animals, like people, carry pain that no one knows how to heal? We're not really sure, Daniel said honestly. Sometimes animals get sad or angry, just like people do. Bronco used to have a special friend who took care of him, but that friend had to go away, and now Bronco doesn't know how to trust anyone else. Emma nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense to her. Like me, she said simply, my mama and papa had to go away too. The parallel was so obvious, so heartbreakingly clear, that it took Linda's breath away. In her years of social work, she had learned to look for signs that a child might be able to bond with a potential placement, and Emma's immediate understanding of Bronco's situation was exactly the kind of indicator she hoped to find. Mr. Morrison, Linda said formally, consulting her clipboard again, I need to know if you're willing to take temporary custody of Emma while we complete the paperwork for a more permanent arrangement. The state prefers family placements when possible, and given Emma's trauma level, stability is crucial. Daniel looked at Emma, who was still gazing toward Bronco's enclosure with an expression of profound understanding. He thought about his empty house, his overwhelming ranch responsibilities, and his complete lack of experience with children. He thought about the financial pressure he was already under, and the dangerous bull that made every day unpredictable. But he also thought about Sarah, who had never turned away from any creature in need. He thought about his own childhood on this ranch, where he had learned lessons about responsibility, compassion, and the bonds between humans and animals that had shaped him into the man he had become. And he thought about the look in Emma's eyes, a look he recognized because he had seen it in his own mirror during the darkest days after Sarah's death. Mrs. Clearwater stepped closer to Daniel, her voice low but firm. Mr. Daniel, Mrs. Sarah would have already had that child in the kitchen with a plate of cookies and a glass of milk. You know what the right thing to do is. Carlos, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, removed his hat and spoke, with the respectful formality he reserved for the most serious occasions. Boss, if you don't mind me saying so, this ranch could use some young energy around here. Maybe a little girl who understands sadness might be exactly what we all need. Daniel looked around at the faces of the people who had become his family. Mrs. Clearwater, with her fierce maternal protectiveness, Carlos, with his quiet wisdom, and Linda, with her professional hope that this placement might work. Then he looked back at Emma, who was watching him with those serious dark eyes that seemed to hold far too much knowledge for someone so young. Emma, Daniel said gently, would you like to stay here at the ranch for a while? We have horses and chickens and lots of space to explore. Mrs. Clearwater makes the best chocolate chip cookies in all of Montana. Emma considered this offer with the gravity of someone making a life-changing decision. She looked at the ranch house with its welcoming porch, at the vast landscape that stretched toward the mountains, and at the adults who were waiting patiently for her answer. Can I hear the sad cow? She asked finally. Daniel was taken aback by the request. Bronco, he's not really safe to get close to, sweetheart. He's been very angry lately and we have to be careful. I just want to hear him, Emma interrupted, softly, from far away. I think he needs someone to listen. There was something in her voice, some quality of understanding that went beyond her years, that made Daniel reconsider his automatic protective response. Sarah had always said that sometimes the best healing happened when wounded creatures recognized each other, and perhaps Emma's instinct to listen to Bronco's pain was exactly what both of them needed. All right, Daniel said slowly, we can walk over where you can hear him better, but we have to stay far away from his fence, okay? Emma nodded solemnly and took Daniel's hand with a trust that surprised him. Her small fingers wrapped around his calloused palm, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel felt the stirring of hope that maybe, just maybe, this broken ranch might have room for healing after all. As they walked toward Bronco's distant enclosure, Emma's teddy bear, tucked securely under her free arm, Linda completed the paperwork that would officially place the child in Daniel's temporary care. Mrs. Clearwater began mentally planning the fastest way to transform the spare bedroom into a little girl's sanctuary, and Carlos wondered if a child's presence might somehow calm the troubled atmosphere that had settled over the ranch like a curse. None of them could have predicted that Emma's arrival would set in motion a series of events that would not only transform the relationship between a little girl and a dangerous bull, but would ultimately save them all from the loneliness and despair that had been consuming Sunset Ridge Ranch one day at a time. The foundation for a miracle had been laid, though it would take the profound wisdom of a 7-year-old's broken heart to unlock the mystery that had baffled every adult who had tried to understand Bronco's rage. As Emma's quiet voice drifted across the ranch, asking thoughtful questions about the animals and showing a maturity far beyond her years, Daniel began to realize that perhaps Linda had been right. Maybe Emma was exactly what the ranch needed, and maybe the ranch was exactly what Emma needed in return. The paperwork that would change both Daniel Morrison's and Emma Rodriguez's lives forever took less than 30 minutes to complete. But as he signed his name on the custody documents, Daniel felt as though he was stepping off a cliff into an unknown void. Linda Martinez had spread the forms across the kitchen table in the ranch house, the same oak table where 4 generations of Morrison family decisions had been made. And now it was witnessing perhaps the most consequential choice Daniel had ever faced. Emma sat quietly in one of the kitchen chairs, her legs dangling several inches above the floor, Coco the teddy bear positioned carefully in her lap. She watched the proceedings with those serious dark eyes, occasionally glancing around the kitchen that would now become her home. The room bore the unmistakable marks of recent loss. Sarah's coffee mug still sat unwashed in the sink, her favorite. Cookbook remained open to a recipe for apple cinnamon muffins that she would never make again. And the kitchen window herb garden was brown and wilted despite Mrs. Clearwater's well-intentioned but insufficient care. The temporary custody order is good for 90 days, Linda explained as Daniel signed the final page. During that time, we'll conduct home studies, background checks, and psychological evaluations to determine if permanent guardianship is in Emma's best interests. The state will provide a modest monthly allowance to help with her care, and she'll be eligible for counseling services to help process her trauma. Daniel nodded, though his mind was reeling with questions he hadn't thought to ask earlier. What? Did 7-year-old girls eat? What time did they go to bed? How did you help a child who had lost everything without falling apart yourself? He'd been struggling to keep his own grief at bay for 8 months, and now he was responsible for helping someone else navigate their own devastating loss. Mrs. Clearwater bustled around the kitchen with renewed purpose, already mentally cataloguing everything that would need to be done to prepare for Emma's stay. "We'll need to get the spare room ready," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "Fresh sheets, some cheerful curtains, maybe a nightlight. And we'll have to think about school enrollment. The Willow Creek Elementary is just down the road, but we'll need to get her records transferred from Billings." Emma looked up sharply at the mention of school. "I don't want to go to school yet," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of panic that made all the adults pause. "I don't want to meet new people. I just want to stay here and listen to the sad cow." Daniel felt his chest tighten at the vulnerability in her voice. He remembered his own first day at a new school after his parents had died, the way the other children had stared at him, with a mixture of curiosity and pity that had made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. The last thing Emma needed was to be thrust into a classroom full of strangers who would inevitably ask questions about why she had come to live with a man she barely knew. "School can wait a few days," Daniel said gently, earning a grateful look from Emma. "You need time to settle in first, to get used to being here. The ranch can be overwhelming at first. There's a lot to see and learn." Linda made a note on her clipboard. "That's probably wise. Emma's been through a tremendous shock, and stability is more important than maintaining her regular schedule right now. A few days to adjust to her new environment might actually be beneficial." After Linda left, taking with her the official paperwork and a promise to check in within the week, Daniel found himself standing in his own kitchen, feeling like a stranger in his own home. Emma remained seated at the table, stroking Coco's worn fur with gentle, repetitive motions that spoke of a child seeking comfort in familiar textures and routines. Mrs. Clearwater seemed to sense the awkwardness of the moment. "Why don't I show Emma to her room so she can get settled in?" she suggested. "Mr. Daniel, you might want to call the school and let them know we'll be enrolling a new student soon. And perhaps we should think about driving into Bozeman tomorrow to get some things Emma might need: clothes, toys, school supplies." The mention of shopping for a little girl's necessities brought home the reality of Daniel's situation in a way that signing legal documents had not. He knew nothing about children's clothing sizes, appropriate toys for 7-year-olds, or any of the countless details that went into caring for a child. Sarah had always handled anything involving children during their marriage. She had been the one to buy gifts for their nieces and nephews, the one who knew which cartoons were appropriate and which snacks were healthy. As Mrs. Clearwater led Emma upstairs to what would become her bedroom, Daniel walked to the kitchen window and stared out at the ranch that had suddenly become much more complicated. In the distance, he could see Bronco pacing restlessly in his enclosure, the bull's massive form moving back and forth with the relentless energy of a caged predator. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had taken in a traumatized child while harboring an equally traumatized animal, and he had no idea how to help either of them. The financial implications of Emma's arrival were already beginning to weigh on his mind. The monthly allowance from the state would help, but it wouldn't cover everything a growing child needed. He was already struggling to meet the ranch's operating expenses, and adding a child's needs to the budget would require careful planning and probably some difficult decisions about which ranch improvements would have to be postponed. But beyond the practical concerns lay deeper, more troubling questions about his own emotional readiness for this responsibility. Daniel had been barely functioning since Sarah's death, moving through each day with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had learned to exist without truly living. He had thrown himself into ranch work as a way to avoid confronting his grief. But caring for Emma would require emotional availability that he wasn't sure he possessed. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Mrs. Clearwater's return. "She's a brave little thing," the housekeeper said softly, settling into the chair across from where Daniel had taken a seat. "Didn't cry once while we were getting her settled, even though you can see she's holding everything inside. That room's been empty since your nephew Tyler visited 2 summers ago, but she said it was perfect just the way it is." Daniel remembered Tyler's visit, Sarah's grandnephew from Denver, a boisterous 10-year-old who had spent 2 weeks turning the quiet ranch into his personal adventure playground. The contrast between Tyler's exuberant energy and Emma's quiet withdrawal couldn't have been more stark. "She asked about Bronco again," Mrs. Clearwater continued, "wanted to know if she could see him from her bedroom window. I told her the spare room faces the wrong direction, but she seemed disappointed. There's something about that bull that's captured her attention, Mr. Daniel. It's not natural for a child to be so interested in a dangerous animal." Daniel had noticed Emma's fixation on Bronco as well, and it concerned him. Children her age typically showed healthy fear of large animals, especially ones with reputations for aggression. Emma's lack of appropriate caution suggested either A dangerous naivety or some deeper psychological issue related to her trauma. We'll have to watch her carefully, Daniel said. The last thing we need is for her to wander too close to his enclosure. That bull has put 4 grown men in the hospital. I can't imagine what he'd do to a child. But even as he spoke those words, Daniel couldn't shake the memory of Emma's response when she had first heard Bronco's bellowing. Her immediate understanding that the bull was sad, her instinctive recognition of emotional pain in an animal most people only saw as dangerous, it reminded him so strongly of Sarah's intuitive connection with animals that it was almost unsettling. The afternoon passed slowly, with Daniel trying to maintain his normal ranch routine while being hyper-aware of Emma's presence in the house. She emerged from her room occasionally, always carrying Coco, and would stand quietly in doorways, watching the adults go about their work. She asked few questions, but her dark eyes seemed to take in everything. The way Carlos repaired a section of fence, the manner in which Mrs. Clearwater prepared the evening meal, the subtle signs of grief that still lingered in every corner of the house. Dinner was an awkward affair. Emma ate very little despite Mrs. Clearwater's encouragement, picking at the chicken and mashed potatoes with the mechanical motions of someone eating out of necessity rather than hunger. She answered direct questions with polite monosyllables, but volunteered no information about her feelings, her needs, or her thoughts about her dramatically changed circumstances. "Is the food not to your liking, sweetheart?" Mrs. Clearwater asked gently. "I could make you something else if you'd prefer." Emma shook her head quickly. "It's good," she said quietly. "I'm just not very hungry. My tummy feels funny." Daniel recognized the symptom from his own experience with grief, the way emotional trauma could manifest as physical discomfort, making even the most appealing food taste like cardboard and sit in your stomach like lead. He had lost 15 pounds in the weeks following Sarah's death, existing mainly on coffee and whatever Mrs. Clearwater could convince him to eat. "That's okay," Daniel said softly. "When sad things happen, sometimes our bodies forget how to feel. Hungry? You don't have to finish everything on your plate." Emma looked up at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected an adult to understand such a feeling. "Did your tummy feel funny when someone you loved went away?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. Emma's directness, her ability to cut straight to the heart of emotional truth with the clarity that only children possessed, reminded him painfully of Sarah's similar gift for seeing through surface complications to underlying feelings. "Yes," Daniel admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "When my wife Sarah died, I felt sick to my stomach for a long time. I didn't want to eat or sleep or do much of anything. It took a while before food started tasting good again." Emma nodded, solemnly, as if this confirmation of shared experience provided some comfort. "Mama said that when people go to heaven, they can still watch over us. Do you think your wife can see us right now?" Daniel felt tears threaten for the first time since the funeral. He had been asked similar questions by well-meaning friends and relatives, but there was something about hearing it from a 7-year-old who was trying to make sense of her own devastating loss that made the question impossible to deflect with. Platitudes. "I hope so," he said honestly. "I really hope so." After dinner, as the Montana sky deepened into the purple twilight that marked the end of summer days, Daniel found himself at a loss for how to spend the evening. His normal routine involved reviewing ranch financial records, planning the next day's work, or simply sitting on the porch with a beer while the day's stress slowly faded. None of these activities seemed appropriate with a 7-year-old in the house. Emma solved the problem by asking if she could sit on the front porch and listen to the ranch sounds. She positioned herself on the porch swing with Coco, her small legs barely reaching the edge of the seat, and gazed out at the landscape with the intense focus of someone trying to memorize every detail. Daniel joined her, settling into the rocking chair that had been Sarah's favorite spot for watching sunsets. From the porch, they could hear the gentle lowing of cattle settling in for the night, the distant whinny of horses, and the ever-present sound of Bronco's occasional bellows carrying across the ranch like a mournful song. "He sounds lonelier at night," Emma observed, tilting her head toward the sound. "During the day he sounds angry, but now he just sounds sad." Daniel listened more carefully to Bronco's vocalizations, trying to hear what Emma heard. To his surprise, she was right. There was a different quality to the bull's nighttime sounds, less aggressive and more plaintive. It was the kind of subtle distinction that he might have missed if not for Emma's observation. "You're very good at listening," Daniel said. "That's a special skill." Emma hugged Coco closer. "Mama said I was a good listener. She said some people talk with their mouths, but animals and sad people talk with their feelings, and you have to listen with your heart to understand them." The wisdom in her words, delivered with the matter-of-fact simplicity of childhood, made Daniel realize that perhaps Emma's interest in Bronco wasn't dangerous naivety after all. Perhaps it was the same intuitive understanding of animal psychology that had made Sarah so effective with troubled creatures. As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Daniel felt the weight of his new responsibility settling over him like a heavy blanket. He was a 52-year-old widower who had been struggling to maintain his own emotional equilibrium, and now he was responsible for helping a traumatized child navigate her grief while keeping her safe on a ranch that housed one of the most dangerous animals in the county. But sitting there on the porch with Emma, listening to her thoughtful observations about the ranch sounds and watching her find small moments of peace despite her profound loss, Daniel began to wonder if perhaps this unexpected placement might offer healing for both of them. Emma needed stability, understanding, and time to process her trauma. Daniel needed purpose, connection, and a reason to engage with life beyond merely surviving each day. The question that remained was whether either of them was strong enough to help the other heal, or whether the combination of his grief and her trauma would prove too overwhelming for the fragile foundation they were trying to build. As Bronco's lonely bellowing continued to echo across the ranch, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that somehow the bull's story and Emma's story were connected in ways he didn't yet understand, and that understanding, that connection, might be the key to saving them all. "Mr. Daniel," Emma's quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart? Thank you for letting me stay here. I know you didn't have to, and I know you're sad too, but I'm glad I'm not alone anymore." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'm glad you're here too, Emma. I think maybe we can help each other figure out how to be okay again." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, neither Daniel nor Emma could have imagined that tomorrow would bring the encounter that would change everything, not just for them, but for the angry, heartbroken bull whose own need for connection would soon intersect with theirs in the most extraordinary way possible. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of crystalline Montana air that made everything seem possible. Daniel had slept fitfully, his dreams filled with anxious scenarios of Emma wandering into danger or crying inconsolably for parents who would never return. But when he descended to the kitchen at his usual 5:30 a.m., he found Emma already awake, sitting at the table with Coco, staring out the window toward the distant mountains with the patient stillness of someone who had learned to find comfort in solitude. Mrs. Clearwater was already bustling around the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be enough breakfast for a crew of ranch hands. "Morning, Mr. Daniel," she said cheerfully. "Our little Emma here has been up since dawn, quiet as a church mouse. Says she wanted to watch the sun come up over the mountains." Emma turned from the window and offered Daniel a small smile. "Good. Morning, Mr. Daniel." The sky turned purple, then pink, then orange before it got yellow. It was beautiful. "You're an early riser," Daniel observed, pouring himself coffee from the pot Mrs. Clearwater always had ready before he woke. "Did you sleep okay?" Emma nodded, though Daniel noticed the dark circles under her eyes suggested otherwise. "I had dreams about Mama and Papa, but they were nice dreams. They were telling me it was okay to be here, that they wanted me to be safe and happy." The matter-of-fact way she described what must have been an emotionally complex dream reminded Daniel of Sarah's ability to find meaning and comfort in life's difficult moments. He was beginning to see that Emma possessed an emotional maturity that went far beyond her 7 years, a maturity born of necessity and loss, but remarkable nonetheless. "Would you like to see the ranch this morning?" Daniel asked. "We could walk around, let you meet some of the animals. The horses are very gentle, and the chickens are always entertaining." Emma's face brightened with the first genuine expression of interest Daniel had seen from her. "Could we see Bronco too? Not too close," she added quickly, sensing the adult's immediate concern. "Just close enough to see him better. I keep thinking about how sad he sounds." Daniel exchanged a look with Mrs. Clearwater, who shrugged as if to say, "Children have their own ways of understanding the world." Against his better judgment, but recognizing that Emma's fascination with the bull wasn't going to fade without some resolution, Daniel agreed to include Bronco's enclosure in their morning tour from a safe distance. After breakfast, they set out across the ranch, with Emma walking between Daniel and Carlos, who had joined them for the tour. She asked thoughtful questions about everything they encountered: why the horses wore halters, how the chickens knew where to lay their eggs, what the different cattle breeds were best suited for. But as they approached the area where Bronco's enclosure was located, Emma grew quiet. Her attention focused entirely on the massive bull who was visible in the distance. Bronco was indeed an impressive and intimidating sight. Even from 200 yards away, his size was evident, a mountain of muscle and bone, topped by the distinctive hump that marked him as a Brahma. He was pacing along the fence line with the restless energy of a caged predator, occasionally stopping to bellow his frustration to the empty sky. "He's bigger than I thought," Emma said softly, clutching Coco against her chest, "but he moves like he's hurting inside." Daniel was struck by the accuracy of her observation. There was indeed something about Bronco's movements that suggested internal pain rather than mere aggression, a quality Daniel had never noticed before, but which seemed obvious once Emma pointed it out. "Emma," Daniel said carefully, "I want you to promise me something. You must never, ever go near that fence without me or another adult with you. Bronco is dangerous, and even though you seem to understand him in some way, he could hurt you without meaning to." Emma nodded solemnly. "I promise. But Mr. Daniel, could I maybe talk to him from here? Just so he knows someone cares about how he feels?" Before Daniel could object to what seemed like a futile gesture, Emma cupped her small hands around her mouth and called out across the distance. "Hello, Bronco. My name is Emma. I know you're sad and scared, and I'm sorry no one understands you." The effect was immediate and startling. Bronco stopped his pacing mid-stride and turned toward them, his massive head raised as if he were trying to locate the source of the voice. For a long moment the bull stood perfectly still, his ears forward in an attitude of intense listening. Then, to everyone's amazement, Bronco responded with a long, low vocalization that was completely different from his usual aggressive bellowing. It was a sound that seemed to carry longing and recognition, as if he were trying to communicate back to the small voice that had acknowledged his pain. Carlos removed his hat and stared in disbelief. "In 20 years of working with livestock, I ain't never seen anything like that. It's like he understood every word she said." Emma's face lit up with joy. "He did understand. He's trying to tell me he's lonely. Mr. Daniel, he needs a friend." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. There was something happening here that defied rational explanation, something that reminded him powerfully of the stories Sarah used to tell about her grandmother's ability to communicate with animals. But even as he tried to convince himself it was coincidence, he couldn't deny what he had witnessed. Bronco had responded to Emma's voice in a way he had never responded to any other human being since Miguel's departure. "We should head back." "To the house," Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's almost time for lunch," but Emma was reluctant to leave. She continued to talk to Bronco from their safe distance, telling him about her teddy bear, about missing her parents, about feeling scared in a new place. And incredibly, the bull continued to respond, his vocalizations growing softer and more conversational with each exchange. "It's like watching two old friends catch up," Mrs. Clearwater observed, having joined them to call them back for lunch. "That child has a gift, Mr. Daniel. Same kind of gift your Sarah had, but maybe even stronger." That evening, Daniel found himself in his study, staring at financial records he couldn't focus on, while his mind replayed the morning's extraordinary events. Emma's connection with Bronco challenged everything he thought he knew about animal behavior, but it also presented new concerns. What if her unusual ability put her in danger? What if her fascination with the bull led her to take risks that could result in tragedy? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the study door. Emma peered around the doorframe, still carrying Coco, her expression hesitant. "Mr. Daniel, could I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart, come in." Emma entered the study and settled into the large leather chair across from Daniel's desk, her feet dangling well above the floor. "Mrs. Clearwater told me about your wife Sarah, about how she could talk to animals and help them when they were hurt or scared. Do you think maybe she's helping me understand Bronco?" The question took Daniel's breath away. The idea that Sarah might somehow be involved in Emma's remarkable connection with the bull was both comforting and deeply moving. It would be exactly like Sarah to find a way to continue helping wounded creatures even after death. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that some people are born with special gifts for understanding animals. Maybe you have that gift, and maybe Sarah is watching over you and helping you use it wisely." Emma nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense. "Tomorrow, could I try to get a little closer to Bronco?" "Not too close," she added quickly, "but maybe close enough that he can see me better when I talk to him." Every instinct Daniel possessed screamed against allowing a 7-year-old child anywhere near the most dangerous animal on the ranch. But he also couldn't ignore what he had witnessed that morning. The way Bronco had responded to Emma's voice, the complete absence of aggression in the bull's reaction to her presence. "We'll see," Daniel said, the classic parental response that bought time without making commitments. "For now, let's focus on getting you settled in here and maybe enrolled in school next week." But Emma was persistent. Over the next several days, she asked repeatedly to visit Bronco, and each time they agreed to observe him from a distance, the interaction became more remarkable. Emma would talk to the bull about her day, her feelings, her memories of her parents, and Bronco would respond with increasingly gentle vocalizations. The angry, aggressive behavior that had characterized him for 18 months seemed to disappear entirely when Emma was present. Dr. Patricia Henley, the large animal veterinarian who had replaced Dr. Peterson after Bronco's attack, arrived on Thursday for what was supposed to be a routine observation of the bull's behavior. She had heard rumors around town about a little girl who could talk to the dangerous bull, but she approached such claims with scientific skepticism. However, when she witnessed Emma's interaction with Bronco from the safety of the observation area Daniel had set up, her professional skepticism gave way to amazement. "This is medically impossible," Dr. Henley muttered, adjusting her glasses as she observed Bronco's completely relaxed posture. That animal has attacked everything that's moved near him for over a year. Last month, he nearly destroyed a steel gate trying to get at a ranch hand who was 50 feet away. Emma seemed oblivious to the adult amazement surrounding her unprecedented ability. She continued speaking to Bronco in hushed tones, telling him about her dreams, about missing her parents, and about feeling scared in her new home. "I know you miss Miguel too," she said, somehow understanding the connection between the bull's trauma and the departed ranch hand. "But maybe we can be friends now. Maybe we can help each other not feel so alone." Bronco responded with low, rumbling sounds that almost seemed like conversation. His ears were forward and attentive, his massive head bobbing occasionally as if he were nodding in understanding. For the first time since Miguel's departure, the bull's breathing was calm, his posture relaxed, and his demeanor completely peaceful. "Emma?" Daniel called gently, not wanting to startle either the child or the bull. "It's time to come back to the house now." Emma turned and smiled at Daniel, the first completely joyful smile he had seen from her since her arrival. "He's not mean, Mr. Daniel. He's just lonely like me, and I think he wants to be friends." With careful movements, Emma stepped back from the fence area, and Bronco watched her go, with what could only be described as disappointment. As soon as she was out of sight, however, the bull's demeanor began to shift back toward the restless agitation that had characterized him for months. Dr. Henley examined Bronco's vital signs from outside the fence, amazed at the dramatic change in the animal's stress indicators. His breathing is normal, his posture is relaxed, and he's showing none of the stress signals I've documented over the past months. It's as if he's a completely different animal when that child is present. Word of Emma's extraordinary ability began to spread throughout Gallatin County faster than wildfire in dry grass. Farmers from as far away as Bozeman came to witness the impossible sight of a 7-year-old girl communicating with the region's most dangerous bull. The story was discussed in every coffee shop, diner, and feed store from Willow Creek to Three Forks, becoming the kind of local legend that would be told and retold for generations. But not everyone was pleased with the attention Emma's gift was attracting. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, a renowned animal psychologist from Montana State University, arrived at the ranch on Saturday morning with deep concerns about what he termed the exploitation of a traumatized child for entertainment purposes. Dr. Whitfield was an imposing man in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of academic arrogance that came from decades of being considered the foremost expert in his field. He had driven down from Bozeman after reading newspaper accounts of Emma's interactions with Bronco, and he was clearly skeptical of the claims being made about her abilities. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Whitfield announced coldly as he stepped out of his university vehicle, "I'm here to evaluate whether this situation constitutes child endangerment. There are serious questions about whether it's ethical to allow a traumatized 7-year-old to interact with a dangerous animal, regardless of any supposed special abilities she might possess." Daniel's heart sank. He had feared this day would come, the day when official scrutiny would threaten to separate Emma from the first place she had shown signs of healing. Dr. Whitfield represented everything Daniel had learned to distrust about experts who prioritize theory over real-world results. "Emma is never forced to interact with any animal," Daniel protested as they walked toward the house. "She chooses when and how to approach Bronco, and we maintain strict safety protocols. The child has a genuine gift, Dr. Whitfield, and denying her the opportunity to use it would be cruel." Dr. Whitfield remained unmoved. "Children don't have gifts for communicating with animals, Mr. Morrison. What you're describing is likely a combination of coincidence, wishful thinking, and possibly some form of behavioral conditioning that puts the child at unnecessary risk." Emma, who had been playing quietly on the front porch with Coco, looked up as the adults approached. Something in Dr. Whitfield's tone and demeanor seemed to alert her to the fact that this visitor represented a threat to her newfound stability. "Are you here to take me away?" Emma asked with the direct honesty that children often displayed in stressful situations. Dr. Whitfield looked down at Emma with professional condescension. "I'm here to make sure you're safe, child. Some adults think it's acceptable to put children in dangerous situations, but my job is to protect you from harm." Emma's expression grew serious. "Bronco would never hurt me. He understands how I feel because he feels the same way. Don't you believe animals have feelings?" "Animals have instincts and learned behaviors," Dr. Whitfield replied dismissively. "They don't have complex emotions like humans, and they certainly can't understand human speech in the way you seem to believe." Emma stood up from her place on the porch, still holding Coco tightly against her chest. "Bronco does understand. Would you like me to show you?" What followed would be discussed in academic circles and local coffee shops for years to come. Emma led the group to the observation area Daniel had established, with Dr. Whitfield maintaining his skeptical demeanor, but clearly curious to see what all the fuss was about. "Bronco," Emma called out in her clear, gentle voice, "this man doesn't believe you can understand me. He thinks you're just a big, dangerous animal without any feelings. Can you show him how you really feel?" Bronco's response was immediate and dramatic. The gentle bull, who had been peacefully grazing, suddenly reverted to his old aggressive behavior, but his aggression was directed specifically and exclusively at Dr. Whitfield. Bronco snorted, pawed the ground, and made mock charges at the fence, but only when the psychologist moved. When other adults shifted position, the bull remained calm. When Emma spoke, he immediately relaxed, but the moment Dr. Whitfield took a step or made a sound, Bronco's threatening behavior resumed. "This proves nothing," Dr. Whitfield said nervously, stepping back as Bronco's aggressive display intensified. "The animal is simply responding to visual or auditory cues in a conditioned manner." "Really?" Emma asked with the innocent directness of childhood. She turned to Bronco and spoke softly. "It's okay, Bronco. He's just scared because he doesn't understand. Some people need to see things with their hearts instead of just their eyes. Please be nice now." Immediately, Bronco calmed down, returning to his peaceful grazing as if nothing had happened. The transformation was so complete and instantaneous that Dr. Whitfield found himself at a loss for scientific explanation, but Emma wasn't finished with her demonstration. "Dr. Whitfield," she said politely, "could you please tell Bronco that you think he's stupid and doesn't have any feelings? I want to see what he does." Dr. Whitfield hesitated, his scientific training warring with his growing unease. "That's not a responsible—" "Please," Emma insisted. "If you're right that he can't understand words, then it shouldn't matter what you say to him, right?" Trapped by his own logic, Dr. Whitfield reluctantly addressed the bull. "You're just a dumb animal," he said stiffly. "You don't understand anything I'm saying, and you don't have real emotions." Bronco's reaction was swift and unmistakable. The bull charged the fence with such force that the steel posts shook, his bellowing filled with rage and indignation. Dr. Whitfield stumbled backward, his academic composure cracking in the face of raw animal fury. "Now tell him you're sorry and that you didn't mean it," Emma suggested calmly. "This is ridiculous," Dr. Whitfield protested, but the bull's continued aggressive display made him reconsider. "Fine. I'm sorry," he said grudgingly. Bronco immediately calmed. Though he continued to eye Dr. Whitfield with obvious suspicion, Emma smiled up at the shaken psychologist. "He forgives you, but he thinks you should be more careful about hurting people's feelings, even if they're animals." Dr. Whitfield stood in stunned silence, his worldview fundamentally challenged by what he had just witnessed. As a man of science, he prided himself on logical thinking and evidence-based conclusions, but Emma's demonstration had forced him to confront phenomena that didn't fit neatly into his academic framework. I must admit that what I've observed here challenges many of my preconceptions about animal psychology and human-animal relationships, he said slowly, his professional arrogance replaced by genuine humility. Perhaps there are forms of communication and emotional connection that current scientific understanding doesn't adequately explain. Emma nodded, as if this admission was exactly what she had expected. Sometimes the most important things can't be explained, only felt. Bronco taught me that. The transformation in Dr. Whitfield's attitude was remarkable. Instead of threatening to remove Emma from the ranch, he requested permission to study her interactions with Bronco as part of ongoing research into animal cognition and interspecies communication. He became one of Emma's most vocal advocates, documenting her abilities and defending her right to continue developing her extraordinary gift. As autumn deepened into winter, Emma settled into life at Sunset Ridge Ranch with a contentment that surprised everyone, including herself. She enrolled at Willow Creek Elementary School, where her teachers were amazed by her emotional maturity and her ability to help other children work through their problems. Her friendship with Bronco became the foundation for additional work. With troubled animals throughout the region, farmers began bringing difficult animals to the ranch specifically for Emma's help. Horses that had been traumatized by abuse, cattle that had become aggressive after neglect, and even domestic animals whose behavioral problems had made them unwanted. In every case, Emma's patient, empathetic approach succeeded where traditional training methods had failed. But perhaps the most significant transformation was in Daniel himself. Caring for Emma had given him a purpose beyond mere survival, a reason to engage with life rather than simply enduring it. The empty ranch house filled with laughter again, as Emma's presence brought joy and energy to every corner of the property. "You know, sweetheart," Daniel said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink, "when you first arrived here, I thought taking you in would be the biggest challenge of my life." Emma looked up from her place on the porch swing, where she was teaching Coco a new trick. "And now?" Daniel smiled, his weathered face creasing with genuine happiness for the first time since Sarah's death. "Now I know it was the greatest blessing. You didn't just heal Bronco, Emma, you healed all of us." Outside, snow began to fall gently on the Montana countryside, covering Sunset Ridge Ranch in a blanket of pristine white. In his warm shelter, Bronco dozed contentedly, secure in the knowledge that his best friend was safe and happy just a few 100 yards away in the ranch house. The angry, dangerous bull had become a gentle giant, proof that love and understanding could heal even the deepest wounds. As spring arrived and Emma celebrated her first full year at the ranch, visitors from around the world came to witness the extraordinary bond between the girl and the bull. Scientists, animal behaviorists, and curious tourists all wanted to understand how a traumatized child had succeeded in taming Montana's most dangerous animal. But Emma always gave the same answer to their questions. "I didn't tame Bronco. We just helped each other remember how to trust again. Sometimes the best healing happens when broken hearts recognize each other." Daniel legally adopted Emma on a beautiful May morning, with the entire community of Willow Creek present to celebrate. As he signed the papers that made her officially Emma Morrison, Bronco added his own congratulations, with a gentle lowing that carried across the ranch like a blessing. Emma's story became more than local legend. It became a testament to the healing power of love, understanding, and the recognition that sometimes the most unlikely connections can mend the deepest wounds. The needy little girl and the dangerous bull had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for: a family where they belonged, a place where their pain was understood, and a future filled with the promise of helping other lost souls find their way home. Years later, visitors to Sunset Ridge Ranch would still find Emma and Bronco together, their friendship as strong as ever, showing the world that love truly knows no boundaries and that healing can come from the most unexpected places. The ranch had been transformed from a place of sorrow and isolation into a beacon of hope, proving that sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we open our hearts to those who need us most. 3 years had passed since Emma Rodriguez first arrived at Sunset Ridge Ranch, and the transformation that had taken place seemed almost impossible to believe for anyone who remembered the dark days when Bronco's rage had terrorized the entire county. What had begun as a desperate placement of an orphaned child with a grieving widower had evolved into something that defied explanation. A story that would be told for generations throughout Montana and beyond. On this particular morning in late June, as the Montana sun painted the grasslands in shades of gold and green, Emma Morrison, now officially adopted and bearing the family name, stood at the fence of what had once been considered the most dangerous enclosure in Gallatin County. At 10 years old, she had grown taller and more confident, but she still carried the same gentle wisdom that had first allowed her to see past Bronco's rage to the wounded soul beneath. Bronco, now a magnificent 5-year-old bull in his prime, approached the fence with the eager anticipation of a beloved pet greeting its favorite human. The transformation in his physical appearance was as remarkable as the change in his temperament. His coat gleamed with health, his eyes held warmth instead of fury, and his massive frame moved with the graceful confidence of an animal completely at peace with his world. "Good morning, big guy," Emma said softly, reaching through the fence rails to stroke Bronco's enormous nose. The gesture that would have resulted in serious injury just 3 years ago was now as natural and safe as petting a house cat. "Are you ready for today's visitors?" Bronco responded with a low, rumbling vocalization that had become his way of greeting Emma each morning, a sound that carried affection, contentment, and what could only be described as happiness. The angry bellowing that had once echoed across the ranch like a war cry had been replaced by gentle communications that spoke of trust and love. Today was special because Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned animal behaviorist from Harvard University, was arriving to conduct the final interviews for her groundbreaking research study on interspecies communication. Emma and Bronco had become the subject of the most comprehensive scientific investigation into human-animal emotional connection ever undertaken, and the results were revolutionizing understanding of animal consciousness and emotional intelligence. Daniel Morrison emerged from the ranch house, his appearance dramatically changed from the grief-stricken widower who had reluctantly taken in a traumatized child 3 years earlier. At 55, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had found purpose and joy again. His relationship with Emma had not only healed his own broken heart, but had transformed him into one of the most sought-after experts on trauma recovery in both humans and animals. "Dr. Chen just called," Daniel announced as he approached Emma. "And Bronco. She'll be here within the hour, along with the film crew from National Geographic. Are you sure you're ready for this, sweetheart? Once this documentary airs, the whole world is going to know your story." Emma considered this with the thoughtful seriousness that had always characterized her approach to important decisions. Over the past 3 years, she had helped dozens of troubled animals, working with veterinarians and animal psychologists from across the western United States. Her reputation had grown far beyond the borders of Montana, but she had always been selective about media attention, preferring to focus on the animals that needed her help rather than on fame or recognition. "I think it's time," Emma said finally. If telling our story helps other people understand that animals have feelings just like we do, then it's worth it. Besides, she added with a smile that lit up her entire face, Bronco wants to be famous, don't you, boy? As if understanding every word, Bronco lifted his massive head and let out a sound that was unmistakably positive. A bovine laugh, if such a thing were possible. The interaction drew a chuckle from Carlos Mendez, who had been observing from a respectful distance. Now, in his 61st year, Carlos had become something of a celebrity himself as the ranch foreman who had witnessed the impossible transformation of the most dangerous bull in the county. "That animal's got more personality than half the people I know," Carlos observed, adjusting his well-worn cowboy hat. 3 years ago, I was ready to put him down myself. Now he's fixing to be on television, showing the whole world that love, who can tame any wild heart. Mrs. Betty Clearwater, now 71, but still spry and sharp as ever, emerged from the house carrying a tray of her famous chocolate chip cookies and lemonade. Her role had evolved from housekeeper to grandmother figure, and she took immense pride in Emma's accomplishments while maintaining her practical, no-nonsense approach to life. "Emma, child, you come get some breakfast before these fancy people arrive," she called. "You can't save the world on an empty stomach, and that bull will still be here when you're done eating." Emma laughed and gave Bronco one final pat before heading toward the house. "She's right, you know," she told the bull. "Mrs. Clearwater's breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and her cookies are better than anything they have in fancy restaurants." The transformation of Sunset Ridge Ranch extended far beyond Emma's relationship with Bronco. What had once been a struggling cattle operation on the verge of bankruptcy had become the most successful animal therapy center in the northwestern United States. The Emma Morrison method of animal healing had been documented, studied, and replicated by veterinarians and animal behaviorists worldwide, though none had achieved quite the same miraculous results as Emma herself. The ranch now housed a state-of-the-art facility for treating traumatized animals, funded by donations from around the world and grants from major universities studying animal psychology. Horses that had been written off as dangerous after abuse found healing in Emma's patient care. Cattle that had become aggressive due to neglect learned to trust humans again through her gentle approach. Even domestic animals, dogs with separation anxiety, cats with behavioral problems, and exotic pets with trauma histories, came to Sunset Ridge Ranch for treatment that conventional veterinary medicine couldn't provide. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Emma's gift was how it had expanded beyond individual animal healing to encompass broader understanding of the emotional connections between humans and animals. She had worked with children who had autism, helping them develop communication skills through interactions with gentle animals. She had assisted veterans suffering from PTSD, showing them how the unconditional love of healing animals could provide comfort that traditional therapy sometimes couldn't reach. Her work had even extended to elderly patients in nursing homes, where visits from specially trained therapy animals brought joy and emotional connection to those who had become isolated by age and illness. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by a small but professional film crew from National Geographic. Dr. Chen was a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an obvious passion for her work. She had been studying Emma's case for over 2 years, conducting interviews, reviewing medical records, and observing interactions between Emma and various animals. Her upcoming documentary, titled The Girl Who Speaks to Bulls, was anticipated to be one of the most important films about animal consciousness ever produced. "Emma," Dr. Chen said warmly as she emerged from her vehicle, "I can't tell you how excited I am to finally capture your story for the world to see. Your work is changing everything we thought we knew about the emotional lives of animals." Emma greeted Dr. Chen with the poise of someone who had learned to be comfortable with academic attention while maintaining her natural humility. "Thank you for wanting to tell our story, Dr. Chen. But remember, it's not just my story, it's Bronco's story too, and Daniel's, and everyone who believed that healing was possible, even when it seemed impossible." The filming process was comprehensive and emotionally powerful. The documentary crew captured Emma's daily routine with the animals, her methods for establishing trust with traumatized creatures, and most importantly, her extraordinary relationship with Bronco. They filmed the bull responding to Emma's voice commands, showing affection through gentle physical contact, and even demonstrating what appeared to be a sense of humor during their interactions. One of the most moving segments featured Emma and Bronco working together to help a severely traumatized horse named Thunder's Echo, a rescue animal that had been so badly abused that 3 different equine therapy centers had declared him untreatable. The horse had arrived at Sunset Ridge Ranch 6 months earlier, violently rejecting any human contact and showing signs of deep psychological damage. "When Thunder's Echo first came here," Emma explained to the camera while standing next to Bronco's enclosure, "he was like Bronco used to be, so hurt and angry that he couldn't trust anyone. But sometimes when one broken heart heals, it can help heal another broken heart." The film crew watched in amazement as Emma brought Thunder's Echo near Bronco's enclosure, speaking quietly to both animals in the gentle, empathetic tone that had become her trademark. Bronco seemed to understand his role in the healing process, responding to the traumatized horse with calm, reassuring vocalizations that gradually helped the smaller animal relax. "Bronco is telling Thunder's Echo that humans can be trusted," Emma translated, though to the observers it sounded like simple animal sounds. He's sharing his own story of how he learned to love again after he thought he never could. Over the course of several filmed sessions, the documentary captured Thunder's Echo's gradual transformation from a violent, terrified animal to one that could accept human touch and eventually trust again. The process took months of patient work, but the results were undeniable. Another impossible case had been healed through Emma's unique approach. Dr. Chen's documentary also explored the scientific implications of Emma's abilities. Brain imaging. Studies had shown that when Emma interacted with animals, both her brain patterns and the animals' stress indicators changed in ways that suggested genuine two-way communication. Veterinary assessments documented measurable improvements in the health and behavior of animals under Emma's care, results that couldn't be explained by conventional animal training methods. What Emma demonstrates challenges our fundamental understanding of consciousness and emotional connection, Dr. Chen explained during one of her on-camera interviews. She's not training these animals in the traditional sense. She's communicating with them on an emotional level that we're only beginning to understand scientifically. But perhaps the most powerful element of the documentary was its exploration of the broader impact Emma's work had on the community and beyond. The film featured interviews with families whose children had been helped by Emma's animal-assisted therapy programs, veterans who had found healing through their work with rescue animals at the ranch, and elderly individuals whose lives had been enriched by visits from Emma's specially trained therapy animals. One particularly moving segment featured Maria Santos, a young woman whose father, Miguel, had been Bronco's original handler before disappearing 3 years earlier. Maria had recently graduated from veterinary school and had come to Sunset Ridge Ranch to understand what had happened to the bull her father had cared for so deeply. "My father used to say that Bronco had a soul that was too big for his body," Maria explained tearfully as she watched Emma and Bronco interact. "He would come home from work and tell us stories about how intelligent and gentle Bronco really was, beneath his size and strength. Seeing him now, so happy and peaceful, I finally understand what my father saw in him, The reunion between Bronco and someone connected to Miguel was deeply emotional. When Maria spoke in Spanish, the language Miguel had used with the bull, Bronco's response was immediate and profound. He seemed to recognize something familiar in her voice and manner, responding with the same gentleness he showed Emma, but with an added quality that suggested memory and recognition. "It's like he remembers your father through you," Emma observed, watching the interaction with fascination. "Animals don't forget the people who were kind to them, even when those people can't come back." As the documentary filming neared completion, Dr. Chen asked Emma to reflect on what she had learned during her 3 years at Sunset Ridge Ranch and what she hoped people would understand about her work with animals. "I think the most important thing I've learned," Emma said thoughtfully, sitting on the porch swing where she had spent so many evenings as a frightened 7-year-old, "is that healing happens when we stop trying to fix things and start trying to understand them." Bronco didn't need to be trained or controlled. He needed to be heard and loved. And that's true for people too. She paused, looking out at the ranch that had become her home and sanctuary. "When I first came here, I was just as broken as Bronco was. We helped each other remember that it's okay to trust again, that not everyone will hurt you, and that sometimes the people who understand you best are the ones who have been hurt in similar ways." Daniel, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, stepped onto the porch and put his arm around Emma's shoulders. "Emma taught me that healing isn't something you do alone," he added. "It's something that happens when broken hearts recognize each other and decide to mend together." The final scene of the documentary showed Emma, now almost 11 years old, working with her newest challenge, a young bull named Justice who had been rescued from an illegal fighting operation. Like Bronco 3 years earlier, Justice had been labeled as irredeemably dangerous and aggressive, but Emma approached him with the same patient confidence that had transformed Bronco, speaking to him about understanding, healing, and the possibility of learning to trust again. "Every animal deserves a chance to heal," Emma said to the camera as Justice slowly began to respond to her voice. "Just like every person deserves a chance to heal. The hardest part isn't teaching them to trust. It's being worthy of that trust once they give it to you." As the documentary crew packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Dr. Chen approached Emma for one final conversation. "Emma, your work is going to change the world. This documentary will be seen by millions of people, and it's going to revolutionize how we think about animal consciousness and emotional intelligence. How does it feel to know that your story with Bronco is going to have such a massive impact?" Emma considered the question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "I hope it helps people understand that animals aren't so different from us," she said finally. "They feel love and fear and sadness and joy, just like we do. If people can learn to listen with their hearts instead of just their ears, maybe there will be less hurt in the world, for animals and for people." 6 months later, The Girl Who Speaks to Bulls premiered simultaneously in theaters and on National Geographic's television network. The response was overwhelming and immediate. The documentary received critical acclaim for its scientific rigor, emotional depth, and powerful message about the connections between humans and animals. But more importantly, it sparked a global movement toward more humane treatment of animals and greater recognition of animal emotional intelligence. Veterinary schools began incorporating Emma's methods into their curricula. Animal shelters reported increased adoption rates as people gained a deeper understanding of animal psychology. Legislation protecting animals from abuse was strengthened in multiple states, with lawmakers citing the documentary as evidence that animals deserved greater legal protection. Emma herself handled the sudden international fame with the same grace and wisdom she brought to her work with animals. She continued to live at Sunset Ridge Ranch, continuing her education through a combination of homeschooling and practical experience with animal psychology. She granted interviews selectively, always focusing on the animals rather than herself, and used her platform to advocate for better treatment of animals worldwide. Bronco, too, seemed to understand his role as an ambassador for animal consciousness. He appeared in follow-up documentaries, educational videos, and even a children's book series that Emma wrote about the healing power of understanding and compassion. But his favorite role remained being Emma's closest friend and partner in helping other traumatized animals find their way back to trust and love. On a quiet evening in late summer, as Emma celebrated her 12th birthday surrounded by the makeshift family that had formed around their shared commitment to animal healing, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. Daniel had officially adopted her 3 years earlier. Mrs. Clearwater had become the grandmother she had never had. Carlos had taught her everything about ranch life and animal care, and Bronco had become her dearest friend and greatest teacher. "You know what the best part is?" Emma said to Daniel as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant colors. "We didn't just save Bronco, we saved each other. And now we get to help other people and animals save each other too." Daniel smiled, his heart full with the kind of contentment he had never imagined possible during the dark days after Sarah's death. "Your mom would be so proud of you, Emma. Both your birth mother and Sarah would be amazed by the woman you're becoming." Emma leaned against Daniel's shoulder, still small enough to curl up next to her adoptive father, but wise enough to understand the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. "I think they're both watching over us," she said softly. "And I think they're happy that we found each other." In the distance, Bronco's gentle lowing carried across the ranch like a benediction, a sound of peace and contentment that had replaced the angry bellowing of 3 years earlier. The dangerous bull had become a symbol of hope, proof that even the most wounded hearts could heal when they found understanding, patience, and love. As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Emma made a wish that she had been making every night for 3 years, that tomorrow would bring another opportunity to help a wounded creature find healing, that her story with Bronco would continue to inspire people to treat animals with greater compassion, and that the family she had found at Sunset Ridge Ranch would remain together for all the years to come. The little girl who had arrived at the ranch as a broken, traumatized orphan had become a healer, a teacher, and a bridge between the human and animal worlds. Her friendship with Bronco had proven that love truly knows no boundaries, that healing is possible even in the darkest circumstances, and that sometimes the most unlikely connections can create the most beautiful miracles. And in the years that followed, as Emma grew into a renowned animal psychologist and advocate, as Bronco became the most famous bull in America, and as Sunset Ridge Ranch became a destination for people seeking to understand the deep, emotional connections possible between humans and animals, their story continued to inspire millions of people around the world to approach all living creatures with greater empathy, understanding, and love. The needy little girl and the dangerous bull had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for: a family, a purpose, and a way to transform their pain into healing for others. Their legacy would live on in every animal saved from abuse, every child who learned to communicate with animals, and every person who discovered that sometimes the greatest healing comes from the most unexpected places. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.